Welcome back, you all, for Chapter 6 of CHD 208. And the title of this chapter is called Funding the Program. All directors, whether you have been previously employed or have any kind of experience in business or not, must understand the finances of operating a center. A major component of the director's responsibility is ensuring sufficient funds to establish and operate the program. Of course, every director must address annually the upcoming year's funding needs, and experienced directors also recognize the need for long-term fiscal planning. And also another important piece is seeking additional funding for your center, but also very carefully monitoring the existing funds that you already have. And those are some essential pieces of the director's responsibility when it comes to the finances of the center. So let's get started and let's talk a little bit about how do we do that. So if you're going to fund a new center, you're going to open one up from scratch, okay? You've done your needs assessment. You've determined that there's a need in your community. It's going to require very significant planning. And part of this is if you don't have a good sense of business or you've never owned a business before, you may want to seek some assistance in your planning and how you're going to go about obtaining your money that you're going to need. And there's lots of sources like the Small Business Administration, your local bank. Those are some people that could reach out and help you. With that. Another possibility, instead of just opening a business, from scratch right on your own, is actually going out and purchasing an existing child care program. Now, if you're going to do this, you're going to want to make sure that you do your homework where this is concerned. And you would want to check the reputation of that center. How the parents feel about it, the way it's perceived within your community. Because if it has a very good reputation, then that means people are going to continue to, ask for your help in keeping their children. However, if they don't have a great reputation, you've got to overcome that in order to build the number of students in your enrollment so that you can keep your doors open. And another thing you're going to want to make sure you do is check with your State Department of Labor about any kind of policies that might be in place that would govern the way you operate your business. Okay, so let's talk about startup funds. You decided that you're going to open a business or you're going to purchase an existing business. Startup money or startup capital is the money that you're going to need to have available to you before the center is open. And then also you have taken into account the amount of money you're going to need for at least several months after you open in order to operate your program until the flow of your tuition and other monies become sufficient enough to support your business. Okay, so if you decide that you're going to start your own business, purchase an existing business, and you have not done your homework and you don't have a proper startup budget, you're pretty much in fiscal trouble right from the very beginning, right from the outset of your program. So you're going to want to make sure that you really do your homework so that you can take into consideration the amount of money that you need to start your program. You got to cover all of your operating expenses until adequate funds become available. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. So one thing that you have to do if you're going to do your startup budget is determine the amount of funds that you need. So if you look on page 96 and 97 of your book, there's some pretty good charts there that explain this, because this is a very detailed kind of businessy thing. And so I'm going to try to explain it to you as best I can. But you have to create something called a break-even analysis, okay, or a break-even chart. And what you're trying to decide is how many students, tuition do you need to cover your operating costs, to break even, not make any money, just break even, pay your bills. Okay, so the first thing you have to determine are fixed costs. Now, fixed costs are things that have to be paid no matter what. Okay, and I gave you some examples: rent, phone, utilities, salaries and benefits of your employees. And fixed costs are things that are predetermined. Okay, so you know how much your rent's going to be because you've signed a lease, or if you bought your building, you have a mortgage payment. So you know you're going to pay $1,100 every month for rent or your mortgage payment. It never changes. Okay, your phone, kind of similar. Now it may fluctuate a little bit, but not too much. Utilities the same way. So we know what those fixed costs are. Okay, so next thing you have to determine is how many children are you going to serve, and of course you've got to base that on your physical plant. Okay, your building. How many children can you adequately serve? Okay, based on the number of children that you can adequately serve, you got to calculate the number of teachers that you need. And remember, those numbers, that ratio of teachers that you're going to need is going to be based on the Alabama Department of Human Resources with our minimum standards guidelines. Okay, so we've got to make sure that we have that under control. So we've determined our fixed cost, we've determined the number of children that we can serve. Now we've decided how many teachers it's going to take to manage and teach those children. The next we're going to do is estimate our cost of food and supplies. How much does it cost to feed them? How much how much supply money do we need from, let's just say, construction paper, markers, glue, scissors, those kinds of things, furniture expenses. We're going to add all those costs together, okay? The fixed cost, the number of the salaries that we're going to have for our teachers based on the number of children we're serving, how much is it going to cost us to feed them and get the supplies, and then we're going to divide that by the total number of children that we said that we could serve, and that would be your break-even amount. Okay, so just a break-even amount, okay, just to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So how does serving variety of age groups affect your break-even cost? Well, it's going to, and it's going to for one reason and one reason only. And because if you serve a variety of age groups, we know, number one, in the state of Alabama, that our student-teacher ratios are different, right? It requires more infants per child, more teachers for infants than it does preschoolers. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is we're still dividing that fixed cost by the total number of children. Then we're going to calculate variable cost. Okay, those are things that are going to be specific to a certain age group. Okay, so like if we were doing a variable cost for our infants, we're going to need to factor in diapers, wipes, formula, maybe as supplies, teaching staff. Remember, we're going to need one adult for every 5 children, right? So we may need 3 teachers there. Then we're going to divide that particular group's variable cost by the number of children that we can serve in that age group. And then we're going to add the variable cost per age group to the fixed cost per child. And then that's how much tuition we're going to need in order to make sure that that particular age group breaks even. Okay, so that's a lot, isn't it? And I told you, remember back in the beginning, I said you got to have a little bit of business sense, and if you don't have any, you just got to keep playing with it or seek out some help so that you can make sure that you do. So an example of this variable break-even cost will be infants versus preschoolers, and that's what I just told you, that it's cost more to serve infants than it does preschoolers, and it's simply based on the supplies that infants need and the student-teacher ratio that's, of course, set by the Alabama Department of Human Resources. So tuition is a major source of income for many centers. Okay, so in order to make sure that you take in your tuition and you have enough, it's going to be necessary for you to balance the number of children enrolled to the amount of tuition that their families can reasonably pay, and then the amount that you need to operate your center. Okay, if it requires you, when you did your break-even analysis and you decided it's going to require you $100 a week to break even, and you don't charge but $65, you're going to close your business down. Okay, because your cost of what it costs to operate is more than you're bringing in. Now, Are you pricing yourself out of your area? Can the families in your area not reasonably pay the amount of money that it might take? So you're going to have to really balance those kinds of things. Even though the teacher salaries, are low in regards to other positions, they are also the biggest chunk of your budget. Okay, it's where you pay out most of your money. So a lot of centers, in order to keep the doors open and manage their tuition, they do kind of an adjusting tuition. Okay, so they may, in order to assist their parents and also to attract new clients, because remember, the whole time you're balancing that budget, you got to be recruiting students into your program. So they may offer 1 or more weeks of tuition free, like when the parents go on vacation, or you get so many days that sick kind of days, that the parents might not have to pay. A lot of programs offer a multiple family discount, meaning like if you have a second child enrolled from the same family, you get a discount, third child, that kind of thing. And then they also, some places charge tuition based on a sliding scale, meaning how much can the family actually pay, based upon like maybe tax returns, that kind of thing. So a lot of people, a lot of centers do that. And most of the time, if they do that sliding scale, they'll be receiving funds from some other outside source, like a government agency that might supplement that tuition that they're actually not getting, from the sliding scale. Another thing that we can tap into is community resources. A lot of centers are subsidized by local charities or churches. Now, when I say subsidized, that means that they're giving them something, but they typically don't provide them cash. They usually provide some in-kind services. Now, in-kind services might be that you open up your center in a church and they let you do it rent-free. Okay. You may be in partnership with a church and they help you provide your janitorial services and supplies. You may be funded by a community group that says, hey, because you service low-income families in our area, we're going to help you. We're going to pay your rent for you. Okay. Those kinds of things. They're not writing you a physical check and saying, here, put this in your operating expense, but they are offering those in-kind services. And United Way is an example of a community agency that does just that. Like, they do offer in-kind contributions or tackle specific projects that a center might have, but they will not offset expenses that the center can't meet, okay, like within their operating budget. United Way is usually like within a grant type situation, and where they're there to help out local agencies. So let's talk a little bit about Head Start. They're the most well-known federal early childhood initiative. Head Start was created in 1965 to help the war on poverty. Now, over the course of time, Head Start has kind of changed a little bit. The original Head Start served low-income preschool children and their families. Well, now there's a new section of Head Start, and it's actually called Early Head Start. And it still services low-income children, but prenatal to age 3. It also helps out pregnant women and also their families. So they are expanding to meet the needs of what's happening, currently. Now, this is a critical issue that we're seeing facing the preschool system. We know that there are Head Start programs, and now there are pre-K programs within our public schools. So there's a big critical issue right now, and this is it. Do we give the public schools, should we just allow them to take over the pre-K programs, educating all our pre-K children? Or do we leave it to the centers that are already in existence, that are already open and have, been teaching that age group for quite some time? And it's a really critical issue. And one of the reasons is the education of the staff. I know many of you know people who are employed in Head Start or employed in an OSR funded pre-K. And their salaries are a little bit more. They have the benefits that are attached to it. They are required a certain number of professional development hours. more than maybe what is required through the Alabama Department of Human Resources for at a child care center. So there's a real, it's a critical issue, and it's one that's being debated pretty regularly in a lot of states. So if you are the director, you've got to report to your board or to your funders, the people who are helping give you money. So you're going to be providing them with a center enrollment report. This is usually done on a monthly basis, where you're letting them know how many children you have enrolled in your program at each age group. You're going to need to get an accounts receivable report. You're going to need to get that weekly from your bookkeeper. And what that is it's showing who owes what, who owes you tuition. Okay. And we know a lot of times families fall on hard times, or they can't, something happens and they can't necessarily pay that week, but they can come in and pay the next week. So you have to really, really, really keep a very close eye on that. Then also monthly, you're going to need to report to your board or funders your budget comparison report. And basically what a budget comparison report does is it shows you what you spent the month before, how much money you have budgeted in that actual category for the particular month you ran the report, how much you've actually spent or have left in your total year budget. Okay, so it keeps you from overspending in certain areas. So it allows you to see, okay, well, I budgeted $1,000 for paper products, and it is February, the second month of my fiscal year, and I've already spent $500 and only budgeted $1,000. So I have half my budget to last me for 10 months. You see, so it allows you to take a bird's eye view of exactly what you've spent and how much you have left. So you got to know how to do all these things. And I know this is so much, but you also have to manage your existing funds. Okay. You can't lose sight of what the money you have. And sometimes if you don't have clear policies and procedures, your money will walk right out the door, and it will be walking out the door by your employees. Okay. So you got to make sure you keep a close eye on your collections, who owes you what, remember? But you also have to watch very carefully for fraud. Okay. And an example of fraud within your center might be an employee actually charging you for more hours than they worked. Okay. So you have to have some very clear policies and very clear procedures about how numbers of hours are reported, who signs the checks. Not one person signs checks in a business. The person who writes the checks signs it, but then the director or the person in charge of the money has to be the other signature on the check. Okay, you have to be very, very, very careful. One policy that a lot of centers have established to combat fraud is no cash. We don't take cash in our center. No cash for tuition. Now you may be saying, well, why? Why would anybody do that? Well, cash laying around in a drawer is tempting for some sticky fingers to pick up and walk out the door. Okay. So if you don't have any cash laying around, then it's not going to walk out the door. Okay. So that's a really good way to keep fraud down. Lawsuits are another thing you have to be very careful for. But here you go again. If you have very clear policies and procedures about who picks up children, maintaining your equipment so that you're safeguarding health and safety, you'll be able to cut down on those lawsuits. So let's look at what we've learned. Operating a center requires a significant amount of planning. That was a lot, wasn't it? The director needs to be able to investigate sources of funding for their center, and they need to be familiar with local, state, and national sources of funding. You have to be able to complete a break-even analysis, because you have to know how much money do you need to operate just to break even. And then you have to understand the difference between your startup budget and your operating budget, and then be aware of circumstances that may arise that threaten your program's funds, like we just talked about. So I know that was a lot. Thank you for joining me, and I hope I explained that maybe in a way in which you can understand it. But make sure that you read your textbook, this chapter, and any of the supplemental materials that might be found in Blackboard. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next week.